Hey everybody, it is Monday afternoon and I want to take a few minutes to talk about my Discus here. Did a big water change last Friday, and so the tank is looking nice and clean. I got the glass wiped down and everybody's looking nice and beautiful, so I thought I would just take a few minutes and get some video of everybody. But I also want to actually talk about my experience with keeping these Discus so far. I never really fully embraced the Discus community's approach to keeping Discus, but I did heed some of the hype that gets spread around within the Discus community, and I worried about nitrate and I worried about food sources and so on and so forth. And so when I put these Discus in the tank, I started treating the tank a little bit differently. I started doing more water changes more frequently. I started feeding more frequently. I started feeding different foods. And I immediately started having problems in this tank. This tank had been ticking over like a clock for several years. And of course, once I started doing things differently, put new fish in there, introduced new foods, new maintenance routines, etc., I started having issues with various fish. I had an issue with my tenopoma. I had an issue with a angelfish that is no longer with us, and I had an issue with a gourami that is no longer with us. Interestingly, I've not had any issues whatsoever with any of the Discus that are in the tank. They've all been perfectly fine. And over time, I have listened less and less to what the Discus community says about keeping Discus, and I've just relied more and more on my knowledge of simple fish keeping. And instead of treating the Discus like they're Discus and like they're some kind of special thing that aren't fish, I've just been treating them like they're fish. I know that's a novel approach to actually treat Discus fish as though they're fish, but when you treat them like they're fish, they actually turn out to be remarkably easy to care for. They are very, very rewarding. They're absolutely gorgeous. Their behavior is incredible to watch. I just really, really have enjoyed owning these Discus. Now, they're not fish that can be neglected. They do require care. They're not a beginner's fish, I wouldn't say. But if you can keep angelfish or you can keep rainbow fish, I don't see any reason why you can't keep Discus. I don't feed these Discus any special food. I just give them the regular food. I feed all of my fish. I don't do any excessive water changes on this tank. In fact, I usually do a water change every several weeks on this tank. When I do a water change, it usually has more to do with I just need to get in there and get the glass cleaned down. Maybe the water is getting a little bit tannin stained and it's getting a little too dark in there for me. I do enjoy the look of the tannin stained water, but I also like to be able to look in the tank and see the fish. And I do have some significant pieces of woodwork in this tank, and eventually the tannins will begin to sort of take over. So that's the kind of stuff I base my water change schedule on, not the amount of nitrates. I certainly don't do water changes every day or every other day or whatever a lot of Discus keepers will recommend you do. A lot of them will even say you must do that. Well, I'm here to tell you, you don't need to worry about that. As long as your water is decent quality, the nitrates don't seem to have any more of an impact on the Discus than the nitrates have on any other fish, which is none. And I have on many occasions had these Discus in nitrate in excess of 60 to 80 parts per million. I'm not going to bother checking the nitrate right now. As I said just a few days ago, I did a really big water change. I do a live stream every Friday night and Sunday night. And on Friday's live stream, I was doing a water change in this tank. And I got to talking and chatting, and before you know it, I had drained about 60% of the water out of the tank before I refilled it. So we just had a really, really big water change, and I would imagine the nitrate is probably fairly low at this point, at least low by my standards. A Discus community person might have a heart attack if they saw that I have 20 or 40 parts per million nitrate in here, but I would imagine it's probably no more than 20 to 40 parts per million after my big water change the other day. It might even be less than that. Again, it was a really big water change. The bottom line is that it doesn't matter. It's not important. It's not harming your fish. The nitrate are just kind of there for something for you to check on. They're not really doing anything, and that holds true with these discus just the same as it holds true with all your other fish. I've never needed any kind of special diet with these. I was messing around with bloodworms and trying to get meatier foods in there. Again, I wound up having issues with the tank, so I've moved away from doing all that. And now, as I've said several times, I don't do anything to these discus any differently than I do with any of my other fish. I just do water changes from time to time. I feed them every day, and that's about it. I just enjoy looking at them. Now, having said all that, I will say that in the discus community, the goal of owning discus apparently is to get them as big as you can possibly get them. For some reason. I'm not really sure why that is the goal, but that seems to be universally the goal among discus keepers, is to get them as large as you can possibly get them. And in order to do that, then you do need to keep your tank set at a really high temperature. You do need to feed them a lot. If you're feeding them a lot and you have the tank at a high temperature, then you're going to be more prone to infections and things like that. So perhaps you might want to do more water changes and all that. So maybe there's a reason that discus keepers go on about keeping discus the way they do, and that's because their ultimate goal is just to grow really, really huge discus for some reason. I don't care about that. In fact, I really don't want these discus to get huge because I have 10 of them in a tank that's got plenty of other fish in it. This tank would be very overcrowded if these discus were all 8 inches in diameter. So if they grow up to be healthy, they grow up to be nice and vibrant, their behavior's good, they're going to live a long, full life, there is absolutely nothing wrong at all with having discus that are not maximum size and fully maxed out as big as they can possibly be. As long as they're good and healthy, they're fine. They're good and healthy. And that is my goal, is just to keep them healthy. You can see their colors are beautiful and vibrant. Their behavior's perfectly normal. No signs of distress or anything else. I know some people will call these dark lines on the side of the fish stress bars, but I could call them communication bars. I could call them pigmentation bars. There's all sorts of things. Calling them stress bars is a bit hyperbolic. The fish use them for communications, and if you actually watch the fish over any given period of time, you will see that those bars darken and lighten on a regular basis. The blue ones don't seem to have the pigmentation for the bars, but the red turquoise do, and almost all of the red turquoise show those lines all the time. The ones that show them the least are the larger ones, and so it probably has something to do with pecking order and dominance and all that. Again, these bars are used to communicate between fish, and it can communicate their mood, and I'm sure it can communicate stress, but those bars get really dark when they're feeding, and when they're mating, different stuff happens to those bars. Will get really dark during mating periods, and so again, those dark bars you see on these fish are not indicative of them being kept in poor conditions or being stressed out. I actually see these bars on other people's discus on a regular basis, and nobody ever seems to mention them or point them out. The only time I've ever heard them mentioned or pointed out is when I talk about my discus and how I don't really worry about doing all that other, 3 water changes a day and special foods, and, talk softly and don't look directly at them and all the other things you're supposed to do to keep discus healthy. Whenever I mention that I don't do those things, then people zero in. Oh, look, see those bars on your discus? Those bars, that's why those bars are there. It's because you're not doing 4 water changes a day, and it's a bunch of nonsense. It's a bunch of nonsense. If you are interested in keeping discus and you've always thought about it, but you've always been afraid to make that final step because of all of the hype you hear, I'm here to tell you, just don't believe the hype. If you want to keep discus. They're a bit pricey. That is a barrier, to entry into the discus world. You have to buy a small group of them, and they're not inexpensive. And then they do get fairly large. They'll get every bit as large as a big angelfish or larger. They might get up to 8 inches in diameter, and so you need a fairly significant tank to keep them in any kind of long-term situation as well. But other than that, if you can afford to buy them, I was fortunate enough to have one of my viewers kindly give me a bunch of these discus as a gift. I will be forever grateful for that. Not only did it give me some amazing fish, but it introduced me to the world of discus, because I was afraid of keeping the discus too, because of all the stuff I've heard over the years. I was reassured that I would be fine. You can just keep them like fish and they will actually be fine, just like fish. And so that's what I've been doing. Again, in the beginning, I did buy into the hype a little bit. I did go and try to, I stepped up my game on the water changes. I changed the way I was doing my feeding, as I said, and I wound up running into issues within the tank. The moment I stopped all that, the moment I stopped putting the frozen foods in the tank, the moment I stopped doing the water changes all the time, and I just let the tank be, and once again went back to just treating these discus as though they're just regular old fish, everything has gone smooth as butter. Just could not be happier with these discus. So once again, if you're on the fence, if you're a little reluctant, if you're not sure if you got the skills to do it or whatever, then you probably do. They're not beginner fish, but they're fairly easy to care for once you've got, your legs under you, once you got some experience in keeping fish, and just maintaining a nice healthy tank becomes routine for you. Then keeping the discus can simply be part of that routine. Again, I do a water change once a month on this tank, not once a day, and everybody in here is just fine. So there you go, everybody. I hope you enjoyed your little look at my discus. Don't forget, I do a live stream every Friday night and Sunday night. Friday night we do an action live stream where I do water changes, tank maintenance, and different stuff around the room. We might experiment on some tanks or do some water parameter checking, etc., etc. And then on Sunday night, I do a Q&A where we may still do some action live streaming, but I devote a lot more time to just answering questions and spending time with my community. I have a great bunch of viewers. I got great members in my membership area if you're interested in checking that out. And just overall, I've got a great channel thanks to all my supporters. So thanks for that. Make sure you're subscribed if you're not already. You want to get in on that good action. Don't forget my live streams every Friday and Sunday night. Ring that bell, do all that good YouTube stuff, so on and so forth. And I will see you real soon on the next one.